Hey, everybody, welcome to the very first episode of what we're calling Stuff is Contingent with Andy and Matt, a podcast about media, media technology, and how all that stuff is both in history and the present, really big, messy, contingent set of decisions and not any kind of clean single story the way that oftentimes it's presented. So I'm Andy Famigletti.
And I'm Matt Brown.
Yeah. And we're going to cut to our conversation that we had a little bit ago in just a minute. But before that, I was cutting this together and I realized that one of the things that people want from a podcast, Matt, is they want to have a parasocial relationship both with and through us. And so what we need to do is perform our friendship for the people. So I'm going to throw you a question and I'm going to ask you to answer it, and then I'll try to answer it myself. So years ago, we met when we both lived in Dallas, Texas. What would you say, thinking back to Dallas, we both since moved on, what was your favorite thing about the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex? What did you like about it the most?
What did I like about Dallas the most? I think the easy answer was that the Dallas Fort Worth area, North Texas, it taught me to love beef barbecue.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Oh yeah, there was some really good. Did you come with me? Did you and I go to that place in the farmers market right before I left,
yeah,
Pecan Lodge?
Pecan Lodge, sure.
Oh, that place was so good.
Amazing. There
Yeah,
were
they
so
did.
many good places. And I mean, I remember that when you were on the cusp of moving away, you had planned to move away. We
Hmm.
spent several months doing a kind of tour of Texas barbecue and burger joints, I believe it was,
We did a
right? We
lot of we did a
basically,
fair amount of barbecue. There were some the chains. There were a bunch of chains there, like barbecue chains that were very well established. Those I found largely disappointing, frankly.
mhm,
Pecan Lodge was great. That place was
mhm.
great. And what was that place we went to? I feel like either you knew about this or Kim Knight knew about this. Our friend Kim Knight, who's also someday when we have guests, we'll have her on the show. It was a place one of you knew about. It was like a fried chicken restaurant, and you would order. Everybody in the party would order the like entree they wanted, and then they just brought every side they had to the table. What was the name of that
Yeah.
place?
Babes. That was Babes.
Babes. That place was amazing. Oh yeah, I still
Mhm.
think about that place. That place was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved the. There was a lot of good food in Dallas. A lot of good tacos. Torchy's had just moved
Yeah.
in. They just opened up a Torchy's like around the corner from me right
Oh,
before I
really?
left. That place was great.
Yeah. Oh.
Uh, and then what was the place right by campus that did the fish tacos?
Was it Velvet Taco?
No, it was like it also started with also like a single word name. Or was that Torchy's and the other one was another other thing? Anyway, a lot of great tacos, tremendous tacos. The
Yeah.
thing besides the food, and of course the people, right? I miss you guys. I miss Kim and Julie, our buddy Julie, who's we used to go to roller derby games. Miss all you guys. But the thing other than the people and the food that I think back most fondly about in North Texas was the weather in about like March, right? When it would be just clear and it would be like 60 or 70 every day. And like, yeah, you could go for a run, you could get outside. The summer was worthless, but the
Brutal.
winter weather was nice. It was really nice.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
There was a kind of mild winter. Well, winter proper, there was like a lot of weird, terrible storms, but like there was a kind of fingernail of good weather in the fall and the spring. And that
yeah,
was nice. Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Um, Yeah, I don't know if we ever talked about this, but after our summer tour of Texas meat joints, where we also enjoyed a lot of North Texas microbrew beer,
Oh yeah.
um, I got diagnosed later that year with gout.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I'm sorry, dude.
The king's disease, too much
Oh
meat and
no,
beer.
that will do it. Oh, I feel bad now. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
All right. Well, there you go, listeners. Don't eat too much meat and drink too much beer. You'll get gout, and
Mhm.
yeah, it's no fun. That's no fun.
Mhm.
So that's
Okay.
some informative health information that everyone
Mhm.
needs, and that's a little just that's me and Matt. So we're gonna cut to now is Matt and I talking about a couple of blog posts we both wrote, just kind of thinking about where digital media technology is and where it's been and where it seems like it's going and what we think about that. It all seems pretty problematic most days, but is there a way to think about it that might get us out of that? So yeah, so that's our conversation for the first episode. Check it out, and then we're gonna come back at the end and tell you what we're doing next. So hi, welcome to the first ever episode of what we are kind of provisionally calling "Stuff is Contingent" with Andy and Matt. Uh, Podcast about the contingent history of digital media and technology, its troubled present and possible futures. Andy Famigletti, a professor of digital rhetoric and digital humanities at Westchester University here in sunny Westchester, Pennsylvania.
And I'm Matt Brown. I'm a professor of philosophy at Southern Illinois University and director of the Center for Dewey Studies, as in John Dewey.
Today we're going to talk about internet memes, philosophical ideas, probably Ted Nelson's Project Xanadu. Probably. We'll see if Xanadu actually makes it in, which is not a musical about roller skating. So if anyone's getting that one wrong, it's not that Xanadu. Since this is our first episode, Matt, maybe we should start just by telling our huge audience a little bit about ourselves. I wrote the script, so I can make you go first, and I did. So go ahead, go first. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Matt.
Like I said, I'm a philosopher. My sort of primary interests are in the history of philosophy, focused on the 19th and 20th century, and in the history and philosophy of science and technology. And, generally, I'm interested in questions of plurality, contingency, the interaction between questions of values and technical questions, whether those are sort of technical questions in science or in technology. I'm also kind of a old school internet nerd in the broad sense. Grew up on bulletin board systems and news groups.
That's definitely something that that we have in common, right? We're both kind of old school internet nerds. That's been part of my kind of research background and agenda too. A long time ago, I wrote a dissertation about Wikipedia and how Wikipedia works. And I haven't done any formal Wikipedia research in quite a while, but that idea of we built a Wikipedia, and that was interesting. Like that was kind of an interesting moment that we had back in 2001. And Wikipedia, for all its flaws, I think is having a moment right now where folks are like, "Oh yeah, no, Wikipedia is pretty good actually." So I thought a lot about Wikipedia and how Wikipedia works and why Wikipedia works, and I did some formal research on that with a variety of steps in between that eventually led me to my current job here, where I teach some digital humanities and some specialized digital rhetoric courses, and a lot of our first year composition course, which is interesting because that's come full circle with technology kind of starting to really influence that in the form of artificial intelligence, right? Generative AI is a
Mhm.
big part of what I think about and talk about now. I think that's why I ended up wanting to do this podcast with you, Matt. Like, because you and I think have a lot to talk about in terms of our digital media moment and where it is and where it came from and where we're scared it might go and where we kind of hope it could go. And so I guess what I imagine, and what we imagine for the format of this podcast, is going to be me and Matt talking about recent scholarship. Sometimes that's going to be peer reviewed. Sometimes that's going to be less formal stuff like blogs, but blogs generally by like scholars and thinkers, people who have done some, some of the work of thinking about this stuff. That might help us to better understand our current media environment, yeah, and where it's come from and where it could go.
Yeah.
And I want to stress could, because I think we're both aligned in like not wanting to be too determinist about all this stuff. Like we want to explore possibilities and not make predictions. You want a prediction, ask a generative AI system, ask Nate Silver, ask a prediction market. Like we're up to our eyes in predictions. And I think sometimes those predictions end up like serving as like a straitjacket on the future. And I think that brings us really naturally into like what I want to talk about or what we want to talk about today, which are like two blog posts that you and I wrote. Yours was what, a year ago?
Yeah, about a year ago.
Yeah, like a year ago. Mine was a lot older than that. I think it was like from 5 or 6 years back. But they both are talking about our larger perspectives on the current technological moment, where it went wrong, like where it's going now. And like, yeah, yours, Matt, I think really kind of succinctly sums up like how you came to be interested in the history and philosophy of technology. And it's a fun post. I've linked to it in the show notes. If I've figured out show notes by the time this goes live, which I hope that I do. And I guess, like, do you want to talk just a little bit about that post?
The sort of inciting moments that led to that post were two things. One is I had kind of recently stumbled across Laurie Emerson's digital archaeology lab at University of Colorado, and was really struck by how much it sort of did a thing that I had thought about doing kind of back in the day when we were both at UTD, sort of digital and technology history in a hands-on way that wasn't just about, examining the past, but also exploring alternative pasts, presents, and futures. So that was one thing. And then Hank and John Green, whose various vlogging entities I follow from time to time, had a couple of posts about internet history, and that I also kind of activated thoughts about not only contingency, but also like what we had and what has changed and what we've lost in kind of digital internet culture, especially YouTube culture, which like frankly they helped create. So anyway, those kind of things were brewing around in my head for a couple of days, and I threw that post together.
Yeah, if you're listening, go back, check out Matt's post. And it starts out with two videos that the brothers Green, right, Hank and John Green, post to each other. You talk about those two posts, those two videos in your blog post. And then you talk about the discussion that the two of them are having. And you write in your post after that, you say, one of the things I like about these kinds of discussions, like the discussion that Hank and John are having through their vlog brothers, right? These kind of discussions help us think about not only how we got where we are, but the contingency of the current way of things, which also entails the possibility of a different future than the trajectory we seem to find ourselves on, which, when it comes to technology, the internet, and media, seems like a trajectory that mostly sucks. So there's that contingency thing again. I think our median listener probably has a sense of what that word means, given who they likely are. What is, when you said that you were really interested in this question of like contingency of the current way of things, like what does that mean for you? Like what are you trying to get at there? Like what's your sense of what it means for things to be contingent?
Contingency, in a sense, means that it could be different. It could have been different, right? I mean, it's kind of a negative claim in a way. There's this great thought experiment that Stephen Jay Gould has, where he asks, like, what if we rewound the tape of evolution back to the beginning and then started it over, played it again? Would we get the same result? Would we get Homo sapiens? And the contingency view is that no, absolutely not. We would not get exactly the same thing, because so many of the little moments that happened were just chance. Whether you think that's true at like a scientific biological level, it's certainly true at a kind of historical sociological level, right? That so many of the things that happen in society are are contingent, are dependent on circumstances lining up, are dependent, most importantly to me, on the choices that people make and the preferences that people happen to have at a particular time. There are all these moments where there were options. Contingency is just that there's nothing necessary about the exact path that we're on or the outcome we've reached at any particular point.
Sense then, like contingency is sort of like a rejection of like teleology. I think one of the things that makes contingency an important thing to talk about is that on the one level it seems obvious. It seems obvious that lots of stuff happens, lots of stuff is happening in history all the time. And I think if you said that to someone, like, oh, history is complicated, things are complicated, lots of things happen and we can't necessarily decide how they're going to turn out. If we rewound the tape of an event, it's not necessarily going to play out in exactly the same way, right? Like there are things that are happen because of chance or these little kind of happenstances. And I think oftentimes folks, if you just put it to them that way, they would agree with it. And yet we also have this real desire in our culture to not believe that, right? Like to believe that idea that people will tell you after a tragedy, well, everything happens for a reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I mean, I hate that, right? And I know a lot of folks hate that, that it's like, oh, everything happens. Well, what's the reason for this, right? Terrible thing that's happened. That doesn't make any sense, right? It happens
Right.
because it happens. But I think on some level, yeah, people want to believe that there's a reason. Like they take some comfort in that. And they want to believe that we got VHS and not Betamax because VHS was better, because that means that in a kind of Panglossian way, we live in the best of all possible worlds. Right? Like here we are in the
Right.
best of all possible worlds. VHS won because VHS is better, so now we have VHS. And so yeah, I think that's one of the things I want us to talk about and think about.
Right. The opposite of contingency, in a sense, is inevitability,
Mhm.
right? But it's also determinism. So I feel like there are kind of there's like an optimistic and a pessimistic way to go in denying contingency. And you're talking about the more optimistic one, right? There's a teleology, there's a reason, there's an end pulling us towards the best future, right? Or
Yeah.
the inevitable future anyway. But also there's a kind of more, I don't know, depressing for me anyway version, which is the determinist. The past, the past is just pushing us to some predetermined end, not because there's any sort of direction that we're going, just because everything that happens next is just a product of what's happened before.
Yeah, that there's no way
Um,
out of it. Yeah, like, oh,
yeah.
well, this is just, and we hear that with AI right now. A lot of folks will be like, well, I don't really like AI, but it's the future. And I think that's the move that makes things, yeah, that's a rhetorical move to remove contingency. This thing is the future. It cannot be argued with. But I think there's a way that those two positions slip between each other. That the that idea of inevitability becomes like one of the ways people make their peace with that idea is by sort of saying, well, this is inevitable, so I guess it's for the best. Like, oh, well, we'll have to make the best of it. I think there is a anxiety that accompanies acknowledging contingency, because acknowledging contingency means acknowledging agency and thus responsibility. If things are contingent, if they could go another way, then all of a sudden now I have to make choices within that contingent environment, and those could play out this way or that way. Whereas if it's deterministic, if everything's already been cast, then, well, it's not my fault, right? Like I can just like, okay. And I think that can be a way in which that can slip in a lot of different ways, where sometimes we feel like, well, if we reveal that things are contingent, then, well, everything can just change. And there can be this weird way in which that gets very slippery too. So yeah,
Yeah.
contingency, it's weird, it's slippery.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what we want to try to do is figure out, like, what do we do with that? And I think that's where you come to an idea about that at the very end of your blog post. So you have that blog post, you talk a lot about the contingent and how folks are trying to figure this out, and various different ideas about our technological present and various different lost technological pasts, right? The way that the internet we have now is not the internet we used to have or the internet we wanted to have. And you close that post by saying, there never was an attempt at a robust history and philosophy of technology to the same extent that there has been such an attempt with history and philosophy of science. Not that the partnership there has always been a successful and happy one. I think in part that it has to do with very different attitudes towards the subject by historians of technology and philosophers of technology. But I do think that contemporary philosophy of technology and the developers of contemporary technology could do better to understand the history, understand what we have lost, and help us find a better way forward. Like, what were you thinking there? Like, what were you imagining?
My favorite person who does kind of integrated history and philosophy of science is this guy. He's at Cambridge now, named Hasek Chang. He wrote a great book called Inventing Temperature, about the development of basically thermodynamics and thermometry. A book called Is Water H2O, which is about the history of chemistry, more or less. And one of the things he talks about is the way in which past scientific approaches have more richness to them than was explored before those were given up, right? One of the things he's kind of trying to do is use history to recover the sort of fecundity and viability of old ideas and old techniques and explore them in the future. And he's actually even like gone so far as to like reproduce like 17th and 18th century science experiments. His book on the water book also like talks about all of the things you can do with phlogiston chemistry, right? And ways in which modern chemistry kind of reflects old phlogiston style ideas in certain respects. Anyway, okay, back to technology. One of the things that interests me the most about the history of technology is the fecundity of sort of bygone technology and the alternative pathways for development that it suggests. What if we didn't give up this and go this way, and we had sort of stuck with this other paradigm, this other technical paradigm, and developed it in a different direction? And those thought experiments really interest me, but they also don't have to be thought experiments, because these things are never lost, right? We can rebuild them. We of course can't force the whole world to use them, but we can play with them. And that's, I think, what people like Laurie Emerson are doing in her media archaeology lab. I think that we could learn a lot about what is possible in technology and what we could be doing instead of what we're doing now from looking at the history.
I think that takes us really neatly then to Ted Nelson. So Ted Nelson is someone who writes and thinks about and designs technology. In the, what was it, the 70s that he wrote Computer Liberation, or the 60s,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and so he's been working on this for a really long time. He's working on his project Xanadu, which is a hypertext system that's very different from our current hypertext system, the World Wide Web, for something like the last 40 years. And according to him, it's much better. And so I think that brings us kind of, if we go back to Ted Nelson, right, we start to get back into the idea of like media and digital technology, which is kind of where we started and maybe where we want to focus a little bit more. So you in that same blog post talk about using Nelson as a source for students. It's an interesting set of video shorts. Some of it is him airing grievances, which he has a lot of, and a lot of it's focused on this idea of contingency, right? That the technological present is set by a whole bunch of human negotiation and political maneuvers and accidents from the past. So here's here's Ted Nelson on the development of his nemesis, the worldwide web, in his Computers for Cynics 6, which you can see if you click through to Matt's blog post. But here's just a few moments of Ted Nelson explaining the development of the World Wide Web.
Now to 1989, Europe, the first public initiative for what will become the World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee, a physicist at CERN, the huge European Nuclear Research Lab, circulates a document entitled Information Management, a proposal, saying, quote, "There are few products which take Ted Nelson's idea of a wide docuverse literally," unquote. Actually, as already mentioned, there were several such products, though the people who made them didn't want to admit it. But in that proposal, Tim also said, there seems to be a general consensus about the abstract data model which a hypertext system should use. Hey, wrong on that one. He didn't ask the Xanadu guys. Our abstract model was off the charts different, but what do you care? Next year, 1990, Tim and Robert Caillot write an official proposal, World Wide Web proposal for a hypertext with a capital P in the middle, and they get support from CERN. Next year, 1991, the web starts up locally. Tim's text format and server software are working and deployed at CERN. It's a preliminary package of text pages, jump format, page structure, directory structure, but it does not reach any general public. 2 years later, 1993, Mosaic. The web browser as we know it makes history. 1993 is when the World Wide Web really happened. The World Wide Web as we know it wasn't created by Tim Berners-Lee, but by 2 university students who pooified the net. That is, they put the Park user interface, or PUI, around Tim Berners-Lee's document format, repackaging Tim's page layout in an application frame with the Park user interface, or PUI, around it. This created not just jumpable pages, as in Tim's design, but a new hybrid, a puppet theater and shop window, now called the web browser in Mosaic.
And you can kind of hear from that clip, right? He's interested in hypertext, the idea of linking text to other text in an electronic document format, but he really doesn't like the way that it's been implemented in our current web. He wishes it were different. And I think that speaks to that idea of like the fecundity of the past, right? There's another way of doing this. We think of the web as normal and natural. Like, how do you navigate? You click on links and then you jump to another page. And that's the way we do it now, but it's not necessarily the way that we had to do it. And you can kind of see that if you listen to kind of Nelson explain things. Um, so Matt, tell us more about why did you think that video series was a valuable resource for undergraduates? Like, why did you want to bring them to TED?
You know, I mean, Ted Nelson is like kind of my spirit animal for thinking about contingency and technology. Like he is, I made this joke to you earlier. He's sort of so cranky that he could honorarily be a philosopher. And he was there on the ground, involved in a lot of the decisions that, made the digital world that we live in today. For most of that time, it seems like he was a kind of minority voice arguing that it should be done a different way. And so his Computers for Cynics series is basically his opinionated history of the internet and the web where the opinions are mostly about all the dumb decisions that people made along the way, right? Okay. Like I said, it's cranky. You got a sense of that,
Yeah.
I'm sure, from the little clip. But look, I think that kind of, could we call it autoethnographic? Anyway, autobiographical account of the specific decisions and personalities and choices, and what he thought was wrong about them. You know, his questioning the existence of the consensus. All of these, I think, give a living sense of this contingency,
Hmm.
of this, of this idea that it didn't have to be this way, right? His idea that our internet, our World Wide Web could be, made up of text objects that had a permanency to them and had a kind of built-in way of referencing and quoting and remixing that was persistent, is like just a totally different way of organizing information than the one we ended up with. And that's interesting.
It is really
Um,
interesting. Here's what struck me as I watched through those videos. And if folks have the time, these are short videos. Go watch them. They're really, really interesting. It's a really interesting take on, yeah, it is very much autoethnographic, right? It's sort of him telling his story of what happened. Here's where contingency gets interesting for me and where I think it can get slippery in ways that sometimes um make me think that the concept can be misused or used in ways that I think we need to be careful of. Like, there's a way in which, when you listen to Nelson tell the story of things, he wants to point out how everything that made things not go his way was like a weird political accident. And if you could just clear all of those things out of the way, the truth of his right way would shine through. Like, it's kind of like Marx. There's a very kind of Marxist sense of things where, like, Marx is like, well, if we just clear all these other contingent things out of the way, then class consciousness will, of course, emerge, right? Like, there it will be. And I I think that, I don't know, what do you make of that? Like, how do we talk about contingency without contingency always being something that's like, oh, those other guys, right? They have this, they're political. Like, we have the one truth. Because I guess that's one of the things I've become really distrustful of over especially the last like 10 years, is that critical move of, well, if we just clear these things out of the way. I'm like, if you clear those things out of the way, there's another thing. There's just things all the way down. But then, like, how do you, like, then is that just paralysis? I don't know. Like, what do you think?
yeah, there's two ways of reading this move in Nelson's. I don't know, but maybe Marx is the same. I'm not sure. What you can read him as a rationalist, right? You can read him as a disappointed rationalist. Like, there was a clear technologically right way to do it, and we just didn't do it because something interfered, politics interfered. And certainly there are moments where he sounds like that. And instead of living in the best of all possible worlds because technological rationality won out, we live in a at least mediocre world where politics defeated technology, right? I mean, another way to read what he's doing is just that he's an advocate, right? He's a historical actor who's always has been and is still advocating for a different way. He's not above the work of politics. He's just doing the work of politics while he also does history and technology and design and all that stuff. And that's sort of, I think, um, that's the better version in my view, right? It's like it's always going to be politics
Hmm.
in the broad sense of that term, that inform the outcome we actually get. Not because And that doesn't mean, I mean, politics is not interfering with getting the right solution. Politics is the way we get the solution, whether it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
Its rightness or wrongness is going to be a matter of, vast debate and disagreement across a bunch of interested parties with different ideas about how to do it. And I think, the thing that I worry about here is premature foreclosure of options. I think in that example, Nelson, in the little clip you showed, Nelson is one of the things he's worried about is the way that Tim Berners-Lee is using like kind of tricky move to prematurely foreclose on certain options by saying there's a consensus when there's not a consensus on certain kinds of architecture, right? And I mean, there's all kinds of practical and economic reasons why we foreclose on technological possibility, right? It's not great when you need to have both a VHS and a Betamax player to watch any given movie. So if we read him as just an advocate for a future that didn't happen, rather than someone who's like trying to get us above and beyond politics, I don't think it's quite so troublesome.
But if that's what we're saying, then what becomes interesting or what becomes important, something you talk about a lot, which is values. Right? Like what values are embedded in this thing? If it's not, well, we have to have this thing because there's just no other way, then all of a sudden we're choosing this thing or that thing on the basis of some set of values and other things that we're trying to use to make some sort of informed choice, which I think is, yeah, that scary thing about contingency. Which then leads me to wonder, like, I think I can answer this, but I'm curious to know how you answer it. Like, what's attractive about Nelson and Nelson Xanadu for you? Like, what's in there in terms of values and possibilities that we lose when we build the hypertext system and the web and the internet that we currently have?
I mean, I don't have his biography in front of me, but like Ted Nelson's basically he's a lit guy, right? I mean, he's a literature guy. He is like really concerned with like text and textuality and scholarship and referentiality, right? What he wanted Xanadu to do is be a way for sort of texts to network with each other in bi-directional ways, right? So like the architecture of the web is essentially one-way links. You have hyperlink, it takes you to another page. In Xanadu, you have these sort of like inclusion relations between texts. So, you might have Milton's Paradise Lost is sort of one page on your web, and you have a paper about a commentary or an interpretive paper on Paradise Lost as another document. And because the paper on Paradise Lost quotes the original text, there are these kind of two directional relations. So not only can you see where the original text is through a kind of link. When you're reading Paradise Lost, you can also find all of the documents that link to it, and how they're used. It's sort of like a version of this that I think about actually is the highlighting function in Kindle books, right? Where you can see where other people, it's sort of like that. And then presumably, like, I mean, this is, someone would have to go back and do this, but you could have links back from Paradise Lost to the Bible. Now, I mean, Nelson is thinking about this more forward-looking than historically, so it's like texts that are born to be on the net rather than this sort of historical text translated to the net. But what's exciting about that? I mean, what's exciting about that, I think, is like it's a different way of thinking about the way that information is linked together. And I think it's a more, I want to say this, egalitarian way almost, right, of linking things together.
That's certainly what Nelson
He's
thinks, right?
yeah,
Like he's like as I was listening to that series of videos, he's constantly going on about hierarchy. He's very
yeah,
worried about hierarchy. Yeah, he wants to link these things together in some sort of like yeah,
yeah,
I do think he sees himself as trying to make all text equal, right? It's all just going to be part of
yeah,
this grand web of text, for sure.
yeah. The other thing he's really concerned about, and I think this is a real worry that the web has, is he's really concerned about persistence, right? When on Nelson's version of the web, if you put something that up, it's permanent. Now, I think that has potential downsides, we could talk about, but his idea is, text goes up, it's permanent. You want to revise it, you create a new text that, has these interlinks with it. And, like digital rot is a huge problem on the internet. Part of that blog post, I have to link to something on the Internet Archive because a 10-year-old conference talk has disappeared from the internet. And as someone who, like, the other half of my life is spent dealing with like archives and preserving, records of a, now 100 and something year old figure, the texts that are 100 plus years old. I worry about a few generations hence. Like, is archival scholarship going to be possible, 100 years from now, if there's no
Yeah.
preservation, there's no permanence. And that would have been built into the web on Nelson's vision. I think, man, that's interesting.
And he's writing, let's see, these videos went up 13 years ago, so that's 2012, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's emerged between then and now is like it's not just that sort of benign bit rot that sometimes things go away because they go away. There's also now a really concerted effort by like particular political actors to remove things or to alter them. And I think that crisis of trust, right? Like, what can we trust? Like, what information sources are reliable? The fact that everything is kind of mutable, changeable, and we don't have chain of custody for information these days. And that's one of the things that's gotten really wiggly with AI. AI will tell you something and it will kind of have a source sometimes if it's doing retrieval augmented generation, but that's not really entirely its source because it has everything it's ever ingested in there kind of sitting next to each other. And what was striking to me as I was thinking about Nelson's vision for like electronic documents, he's very upset that we're recreating paper, that we're going to look at one document at a time. Like you're going to have a document on your screen, you're going to link to another document, you're going to link to another document, you're going to jump between them. Boy, he's really mad about that because I think he does have this vision of like all the text all at once. And weirdly, in a kind of like through a mirror darkly way, that's what a large language model is. It's like all the text all at once, and it is kind of permanent because once it's in the embeddings, it's not going anywhere. Like an embedding is just like it's like that model is the model. You're not changing it once it's in the model. You can make another model and they do it all the time, but like if you have a model, it's kind of set and it's everything all at once and it's not paper. And it's weird that that's almost like this like weird like it's like an anti Xanadu, right? It's kind of doing that, but it's doing it in this way that is absolutely centralized and hierarchical. I wonder, we should go through and see like has Ted Nelson had anything to say about the LLM, because I can't imagine it's anything nice. I should go look that up.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to be close to 90 years old now.
Yeah.
Um, but uh yeah, but like it doesn't preserve any of that referentiality, right? Like it doesn't
No, it
have
doesn't. Yeah, it's the opposite
that
in that
that
regard. Yeah.
that kind of like almost like citation as a built-in necessity, right? That's obviously missing.
Yeah, and it's not only missing, it's like it's erased in a more profound way than ever before. Though what's
Right.
weird is that the Xanadu idea makes citation like mandatory in
Yeah.
ways that I'm like, oh, is that even, how would you do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting vision. I really encourage folks to look at it. Look at some of the visualizations that folks have come up for, like what a Xanadu browser would look like. It's a very different experience of text. And it's kind of interesting. And yeah, maybe it's not feasible immediately, but that's okay. Like it's a, it's a tool for thinking with. And I think that's what's kind of neat about it.
And we could have gone that way, right? We could have that instead of the web, or we could have never replaced Gopher with hypertext, right? To refer to yet a different
Remember that time I
structure
spun
for
up a Gopher
presenting.
server
I do
in
remember
all of it?
that.
That was fun. Yeah.
And Gopher, for those who don't know, is like a much more rigidly structured text
Hmm.
format, right? One that really focused on content over presentation, and was like totally it preceded, I believe, the web protocol, and was entirely replaced by it, basically.
Yeah, basically,
Although
I remember being around in the late 90s and it was already sort of like on its, yeah, on its, or the mid 90s, it was already kind of on its way out.
yeah, although there is a Chrome plugin for viewing Gopher servers on Google Chrome. Well, Andy, speaking about where we are now and kind of the craziness of where we are now, you have this blog post from, gosh, like 6 years ago,
A long time ago.
where, you sort of, I think you nicely compare the kind of utopian dreams we had about the future of the internet in 2004,
Hmm.
Web 2.0, where everyone was an author and as well as a reader. And you were comparing that to the then 2019 state of things, where, as you say, now it's 2019 and Trump is president and Nazis are swarming everywhere. Well, gosh, Andy, it's 2025 and
Gotten worse.
Trump is president and Nazis are even more swarming everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you were sort of thinking about in this blog post.
That was me wrestling with some of that same question or that same concern I had about the idea of clearing away that I just talked about. Because I think there was a sense in the early 21st century that if we could just get certain traditional media hierarchies out of the way, then things would automatically get better. We would democratize things. We would give everybody a voice. And wouldn't that be great? I think the way that that played out became problematic for a few different reasons. And one of those reasons I trace back to this book by Whitney Phillips, This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things, right? Where she kind of talks about troll culture and the way in which like troll culture emerges out of the early 21st century internet. And she talks about this interrelationship between trolls on internet spaces and mass media. She says that these two things are thought of as being like opposed to one another. Over here we have new media, which is weird and democratic. Over here we have old media, which is top down and hierarchical, and they're in opposition. They're butting heads. And for Philip, she's like, well, actually, what the troll ends up doing is taking control of these big old media systems via new media means. it's viral, not in the sense of spreading one to one, but it's viral in the sense it's this little particle that gets into a much bigger organism and takes it over. And she has this kind of darkly funny but also terrible example of how these trolls create like various different fake drugs that they say the kids are using, and these become like major news stories. I think this was before Tide Pods, but if folks remember the Tide Pod terror, it's very similar to that, right? Like, oh, everyone's the kids are eating Tide Pods, and then the news gets on TV and like, this is very important. Tell your children not to eat Tide Pods. And that's how everyone hears about eating Tide Pods until finally someone really does eat a Tide Pod and have to go to the hospital. Because like this thing becomes this like self-perpetuating way of thinking about things. And I think a lot of what I was doing in that post was like connecting what Phillips was saying in that book about trolls and their desire to make something happen in the mass media. And her like darkest and kind of also like most darkly funny example of that was them like leaking this supposed confession of an online pedophile group to Oprah Winfrey, right? And they say, oh, it's this confession of these online pedophiles. It's this entirely fake document that's just riddled with, it's basically riddled with memes. They're just getting Oprah to say the words over 9,000 because that's a meme. And now they've gotten Oprah to say it, right? By putting it as part of the text of this confession. And now she said it. Yay. And in a sense, I think the Trump presidency, there are echoes of that in the Trump presidency, like entirely. Like there is, I think, a certain subset of Trump voters for whom the thrill is, look, we elected this guy that they said we couldn't elect. Like, look at this, look at this. Like, look what we did, right? We elect, like, look, we scrawled our names across the country, and he is our Sharpie marker that we have scrawled our name across the country with.
Yeah.
And
I mean that like why is that's the where the marriage of Trump and Elon Musk really sits, I think, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, right? Like, so now they're these two pieces of things. And I guess what was interesting for me as I read that Phillips was I started thinking about Neil Postman, as I often do. And Postman has this whole thing about, like, he calls it the information action ratio, where he says, like, for most of, and again, Postman is another one of these thinkers who's really powerful, but maybe oversimplifying things in certain ways. But he's kind of saying, well, for most of human existence, we live in these communities where if you learn something, you can do something about it. You know, your neighbor tells you that there's a drought and the crops are failing. Okay, well, you and your neighbor figure out how to dig an irrigation ditch, and then you make things better. It's something you can do to act on the information you have. There are, of course, important limitations to that, but he's saying at least most of the time that's what's happening. And he's like, well, the minute we get the telegraph, all of a sudden everybody is bombarded by all this information that they can't act on, and they just have it, and there's nothing they can do with it, and this kind of makes people miserable and kind of crazy. And like in some ways that troll impulse to me is like a reaction to that. Like I am being bombarded by this information I can't act on. I'm stuck in this social media space. What can I do? I can do something that will, get my local newscaster to say don't eat Tide Pods, or get Oprah to say over 9,000, or get Donald Trump to be the president of the United States. And that's interesting to me because there's this assumption in that early 21st century internet culture that democratization of information, like that word democratization, has come full circle. Now it's what the AI guys talk about. We're going to democratize art because everyone's just going to be able to type in a prompt and make a picture, right? And right, so that word just becomes ridiculous. But there's this weird slippage between what Nelson's talking about of democratizing text, making them egalitarian, And that early 21st century, like Web 2.0 vision, like we're going to democratize information, we're going to make everyone, an author. And there's something about like, oh, there's all this stuff, and we never quite figure out how to navigate it or how to act on it. And now we end up with this. And like, what do we
Yeah.
do with that? And like, what other possibilities are there that might get us out of this, mess?
This makes me think about a question I often have when I think about sort of history and the internet, which is what about news groups? So like, I think you're describing the kind of excitement and sort of democratization fervor of the early 21st century, right? Like 2004 to 2012 kind of thinking about the internet. You're describing it well, but like think back another decade or two before that when one of the major ways that people interacted on the internet was not on the web but on news groups, right?
Yeah.
Um, which were like, very democratized in some sense, right? They anybody could post. There wasn't like a lot of centralized authority over who said what, right? Um, and like in the discussion of like whatever happened to news groups, I think one of the things we inevitably have to talk about is flaming, right? Which was like a big part of news group culture, right? Um, I learned today from Wikipedia that to flame and to troll are not the same thing, and I've heard that Wikipedia is a reliable authority. Um,
So it's a reliable authority on that for sure. Like if there's
early,
anything Wikipedians know, it's that. Yeah.
I mean, I heard earlier somewhere that it's in Wikipedia is enjoying a kind of a heyday, and
Renaissance. Yeah.
okay, but clearly they're different things. Maybe that's another podcast, but they're certainly related, right? In the sense that in the context of online culture, they are a kind of intentional poisoning of the well in some ways, right?
Mhm.
Trolls go out to different parts of the internet as well as to old media in some sense and kind of and poison the well, right? I mean, flame wars definitely poison the well of a lot of news groups and a lot of online communities
Oh yeah.
in that day. And so it would have been easy, I mean, for someone who was active on the internet in 2004 to know about the role of flaming
Hmm.
in internet culture, right? Because it had existed for decades at that point. But like that, I don't remember anybody ever talking about that in this kind of excited moment of like say 2004, right?
Yeah.
Um, it was just the blogs are going to create the new sphere, and we're all going to ascend to a new way of being, right?
No, it's definitely yeah, no new sphere. Oh man. Yeah. Uh yeah, no, you're right about that. Though of course the other thing that the end of Usenet gets blamed on is the endless September of whatever year that was. When was it the AOL connected to Usenet, right? That was the year. So the reason that gets called Endless September is that Usenet historically was basically a university club, right? Like it was university students mostly and faculty who were on Usenet. And every September, new students would show up. They would get their Usenet accounts. They wouldn't know how to behave, and everything would be crazy for a while. And then after a while, like they would get acclimated, they would learn how you exist in this space, and things would calm down again. And then AOL, it would have been sometime in the 90s, opens up their connection to the Usenet, and AOL users connect to Usenet, and it's like an endless deluge of first year students, which is like there's this question of like scale, right? We keep talking about these alternate pasts, and this is something I think we're going to have to come back to and talk about more. And a lot of times these alternate pasts are pretty small, like Usenet was in some senses democratic in that Usenet, if you were on Usenet, everybody was fairly equal, but not that many people were on Usenet. And the people who were on Usenet were, I wonder if, I haven't actually seen a demographic study of Usenet. I'm sure someone's got one, but if that said that the percentage of Usenet users was, more than 10% female, I would be shocked. That would be weird. And so these questions of like, how do we have these? What can we learn from these pasts, which are oftentimes small and limited and exclusionary in ways that are not what we want? Is there still something we can learn from them? Even Wikipedia, before its recent heyday, the big complaint about Wikipedia, and a justified complaint about Wikipedia, is that its editor base was, by the best numbers we had at the height of its power, 90% male, 85% male, right? And mostly from the developed world. And so there's all these folks who are like important folks, and they're not there. And like, what do you do about that? And so, yeah, I think one of the things we're going to have to think about as we keep talking about this is, if we're looking back at the past for like images of of an interesting future or a different future, yeah, what do we do about that? Like, because oftentimes, yeah, there's stuff there that's it's smaller and more exclusive than we'd like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely this is too much here to get into it fully, but
Oh, yeah.
like, I mean, it's clear, right, that accessibility, um, in the sense of anybody can pick it up and use it, has been a kind of overriding value for a lot of the technological development, right? It was easier to get on the web than it was to get on Usenet. It was easier to spin up a blog than it was to create web pages by hand.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hell of a lot easier to get on Facebook and start posting stuff than it is to spin up a blog, etc. Right? Um, is this sense of like usability or accessibility, like, is it the overriding technical value that it has been treated as?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and uh, and then I mean, like, does every space, this is another, a thing I think about democratization, that is questionable, is like, does every space have to have everybody on it?
Yeah.
Right? Is I mean, that maybe goes to your Postman thing. I got off Facebook about 6 weeks ago, and I was there, with like, I don't know, 950 of my closest friends, and also like 2/3 of the things I got were content pushed by advertisers or whatever from other places I didn't want to see. But like, I'm posting to all these people who I don't really know that well. I've moved like all my social media life onto a little tiny Discord server with like, I don't know, in terms of activity, maybe 10 of my closest internet friends.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not like less happy sharing with them than I was sharing with, uh, what, 10 times more than 10 times as many people. Um, uh, and maybe it's the same. Maybe we need like an explosion of different kinds of experiences for different people. I don't know. But I mean, um, I also am someone who really believes that like people's ability really like rises or falls to the level of expectation that you have for them, right? So like, building technology for dummies makes people into technological dummies, right?
Huh.
Is another part of my belief. Like, people don't have to have any technical literacy. And like, I mean, you know, I'm sure you experience this all the time in the kind of teaching you do. Like college freshmen today, like, have way more technical literacy than we did as college freshmen. Um, Like they don't know how half the technology they
Oh
use
yeah, no. Well, yeah,
works.
because they didn't have to figure it out. So it was just kind of given to them. I also think one of the things I've experienced as someone who teaches kind of digital topics is there's a lot of um, there's a lot of digital burnout. Like there's no better way to take all of the excitement out of your median 18-year-old than to say, well, we're going to talk about some interesting digital tools. They hate that because they've just had them just foisted on them one after another. Um, I had a chance to sit in on these folks who do our museum studies program here, and all the students there were having a great time because they had all these like weird physical things, right? And they got to play with them. But of course, you and I have had this conversation before, and the interesting thing is, of course, computers are weird physical things too, right? And like you can get back at that and think about what that means and what that does. All right. So, like, where does this leave us at the end of our first our first podcasting session, Matt? Like, what do you think the takeaway is here for the peoples, for our huge audience? There's so many of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. I mean, obviously stuff is contingent. That's a big takeaway.
It's a contingent, yes. Start where we began, or end where we began. Yeah.
Um, uh, I mean, does that just, I mean, do we want to just go straight into the cliche, a better world is possible? Or does that make you kind of
It
gag a little bit?
does make me gag a little bit because at this point we also know that many worse worlds are also possible, right? And so it's like, well, yeah, but maybe like different worlds are possible. And I guess what I'm hoping we can be, and like, tell me if like, let's like, we'll just figure this out live. We'll just do this right now. What I hope we can be is not so much like in that like didactic mode of how can we make a better world possible, but just like what is there out there that we can explore that like we forgot about? Maybe that is cold radiation, or maybe it's Project Xanadu, or maybe it's Neil Postman, or some other source that we haven't been thinking about as much. Like what is out there that that could be recovered and thought about and pried open and looked at, just to think about, yeah, but the world we have is just the world we're used to, and there's a lot of other things that we could think about. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think definitely uh, critique is still going to happen. You
Oh yeah,
know, we're still going to have to talk about what's um, what is sort of false in our thinking about what's inevitable and what's wrong with the way things are. But I agree that like exploring alternative possibilities is yeah, is much more interesting,
yeah.
right?
Like so much, yeah, so much of our information space right now wants an answer, and it wants an answer right away. And
Yeah.
yeah, maybe we just don't do that for a bit. All right. Well, good talk, man. It was good talking to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Likewise.
So that's our conversation. Uh, anything you want to add, Matt? Now that we're done, now that we're back in B-roll time.
Uh, no, not really. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So next time we're going to try to do these about every 2 weeks. We'll see how it goes. Next time we're going to be thinking about AI and the economy and the media economy in particular, which is kind of intermingled with the regular economy in ways that are hard to sort out. We've got a couple of blog posts we're going to look at about how AI is maybe having an impact on work for both educators and photographers. I think it's a really interesting take. And a more scholarly piece, AI as a normal technology that tries to cut through some of both the doomerism and the hype of the tech, that I thought was very simpatico to our own takes on things. And we're just going to kind of talk about what might the history of media and our philosophy of media and technology have to say about this moment? What can we do with that? So
Yeah.
until next time, remember,
Yeah.
stuff is contingent.
I'm
I
really
need a
looking forward to
medication
this
though.
conversation.
It's not gonna work.
uh,
It's not gonna work.
you
All right.
gonna redo that?
No, we're just gonna leave
No.
this all in. This is all just going in. We're
Oh,
just
okay.
gonna go full fourth wall. And
I am looking forward to this conversation because I am like more and more just a doomerist about all this stuff. So
yeah,
I'm hoping you're
it's
gonna
easy
talk
to
me out
get
of it.
very doomy. Yeah, maybe that's what
Yeah.
we're gonna do next time. We're just gonna try to see if we can find a way to contingency ourselves out of the doom, or at least figure
Right.
out what to do next. Yeah, that photography blog post.